Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving into a massive topic that you're hearing more and more about, de-dollarization. It's this idea that the world is starting to shift away from using the US dollar for everything. So let's jump right in and figure out why this is all happening right now.
For half a century, the US dollar has been the undisputed king of global finance. No question. But, things are starting to change. More and more countries are actively looking for other options. So the question we've got to ask is, are we actually witnessing the end of an era? Let's really dig in and see what the evidence says.
Okay, so to figure out where we're headed, we've got to go back in time to understand how we got here in the first place. You see, the dollar's power, it didn't just happen by accident. Nope, it was built on a very specific and, frankly, a game-changing deal. It all goes back to 1971. That's when the US did something huge. It completely cut the dollar's tie to gold. Then, just 3 years later, an absolutely critical deal was made with Saudi Arabia. All their oil would be priced in US dollars. And just like that, the petrodollar was born. This created this huge, unending demand for American dollars all over the world. But now you fast forward 50 years to today, and that deal, it's off the table. It has expired. This whole petrodollar system, it was an absolute masterstroke. Think about it. If you're any country on Earth and you need to buy oil, what do you need first? You need US dollars. This gave the US something people call an exorbitant privilege. It's this incredible power to run massive deficits, knowing the world always needs your currency. And that advantage has helped pay for everything from America's military power to its programs back home. Okay, but after 5 decades, that very foundation is starting to show some pretty serious cracks. The world looks a lot different now, and you better believe the way countries see the dollar is changing too. So what's causing these cracks? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle is how the dollar has been used, not just as money, but as a weapon. When the US and its allies froze something like $300 billion of Russia's reserves, that sent a massive shockwave across the globe. All of a sudden, countries everywhere started asking themselves, wait a minute, are our dollar reserves actually safe? And you can see the effect of that thinking right here in the data. If you look back just about a decade ago, over 65% of all the money central banks held around the world was in US dollars. It was the safe asset for the entire planet. But now, jump forward to late 2024, and that number has dropped below 60%. Now, look, that's not some crazy collapse, right? But what it is a really clear, really deliberate decision by central banks to, diversify and not have all their eggs in the dollar basket anymore. Okay, so if countries are slowly backing away from the dollar, the big question is, what are they moving to? Well, it turns out they're not just waiting around. They're actually building a whole parallel financial system, piece by piece. And listen, this isn't just some theory anymore. This is happening on the ground. You have major economies building these new trade routes that completely bypass the dollar. Russia and China, over 90% of their trade is now done in their own currencies. Brazil and China, same story. India's buying oil in rupees. And maybe the biggest one yet, even Saudi Arabia is talking about selling oil to China, its #1 customer, in Chinese yuan. That's a huge deal. And, it's not just about the currency they're using. It's about the plumbing, the pipes that the money flows through. Think of it this way. For decades, the whole world used SWIFT. It's kind of like the WhatsApp for international banking. It's the main messaging app. Well, China went ahead and built its own version called SIPS. It's a brand new competing app that lets them send money completely outside of that system the West controls. Then you've got this other huge development, Project mBridge. It's basically a platform for all these new digital currencies that central banks are creating. When they first tested it out back in 2022, it was pretty small. It handled about $22 million. Just a proof of concept. But check this out. By late 2025, that volume absolutely exploded to over $55 billion. We're talking about a 2,500 times increase. That tells you this is going from a tiny experiment to a real workable alternative for international trade, and it's happening fast. So who's the main driver behind this explosion? Well, it's really no mystery. A massive 95% of all the money moving on this new platform is China's digital yuan. It's crystal clear that China is using this tech as a supercharger to push its currency onto the world stage. Okay, so you see all this momentum, right? You hear about all these alternative systems, and it's easy to think, wow, the the dollar's toast. But it's just not that simple. The dollar has some massive, baked-in advantages that are incredibly difficult to compete with. Just take a look at these numbers. Every single day, something like $7.5 trillion gets traded on the foreign exchange markets. It's a mind-boggling number. And the US dollar, it's on one side of almost 90% of those trades, almost 9 out of every 10. The Chinese yuan, with all the buzz around it, is only involved in about 7%. I mean, the sheer amount of dollars sloshing around the system, its liquidity, it's just in a different league. And look, it's one thing to build a new system. It's a whole other challenge to get the entire world to trust it. The yuan, for example, has had its own set of problems. Its use in global payments actually went down recently. That kind of instability is exactly why so many countries are still pretty nervous about jumping ship and tying themselves to a brand new currency. And then, of course, you have the raw politics of it all. You can't ignore it. In early 2025, President Trump put it in no uncertain terms. He laid down a direct threat to the BRICS countries, basically saying, if you try to create a new currency to replace the dollar, we will hit you with massive tariffs. And the reaction? It was instant. Leaders who had been loudly championing a BRICS currency, like Brazil's president, suddenly got very quiet. Even Russia came out and said they weren't trying to ditch the dollar. It just goes to show you, trying to take on the dollar head-on comes with huge economic risks. And right now, it seems those are risks most countries just aren't willing to take. So, where does all this leave us? What's the takeaway? Well, it's clearly not a simple story of the dollar collapsing and some new currency taking over. What we're really seeing is a shift from a world with one financial superpower to a world with several, a multipolar world. When you look at what the experts are saying, they see a few ways this could play out. But in almost every single scenario, the story is the same. The dollar's slice of the pie gets smaller, for sure, but it still stays the biggest, most important currency out there. So the future isn't a world without the dollar. It's a world where the dollar might be, let's say, first among equals, instead of the only one calling all the shots. Here's probably the best analogy I've heard for it. Think of the dollar system as the world's main interstate highway. For decades, it was the only road, connecting everybody. But what's happening now is that countries are building their own regional expressways. They can still use the big highway when they need to, but for local trips, they've got new options. They don't have to rely on that one single road for everything. So, to wrap it all up, the dollar's absolute, total reign, that's probably giving way to something more complicated. Its dominance isn't over, not by a long shot, but that exclusive iron grip it had, that's definitely loosening. And this isn't some overnight crash. It's a huge, slow-motion change that's going to reshape global power for years, maybe decades to come. The question really isn't if the world is changing